After suffering a severe accident that nearly took his life, a successful businessman became a prisoner of his own body, unable to speak or move, yet fully conscious. To his greatest shock, in a moment of clarity, he overheard his beloved wife speaking on the phone with her lover. They were planning to disconnect his life support to gain their freedom and claim the businessman's entire inheritance. However, the wife could never have imagined that this cruel act would come at a very high price. Elliot Parker had always believed his life was perfect. As the owner of a software company in Indianapolis, he had built a successful career from the ground up. Tireless in his work yet sensitive to the needs of those he loved, Elliot skillfully balanced the demands of work and personal life. His marriage to Kylie was, to him, his greatest achievement. She was the woman who lit up his world with a smile, the partner he had always envisioned by his side through both the best and worst of times. It was a Saturday morning, and Elliot was driving to a last-minute meeting. He planned to shorten the appointment so he could take Kylie to her favorite restaurant that evening. It was a tradition they had upheld since their first year of marriage, a gesture to reaffirm the love Elliot believed was unshakable. But fate had other plans. The impact was as violent as it was unexpected. Elliot never saw the other car coming until it was too late. The sound of crumpling metal was the last thing he heard before absolute silence. When the paramedics arrived, they found Elliot trapped in the wreckage, gravely injured but still alive. Days later, when he finally regained consciousness, everything felt strange. He tried to open his eyes, but they wouldn't respond. He tried to move his fingers, speak, scream, but nothing happened. Only darkness and distant voices remained. His mind was intact, but his body had betrayed him. He listened as the doctors explained his condition. It's locked-in syndrome. He's conscious but unable to move or communicate. Kylie's voice was constant in the early days, offering words of comfort and promises that she would stay by his side. At first, those words were a relief, but they soon became a form of torture. He wanted to respond, to tell her he was there, that he could hear her, but the silence was absolute. As the weeks passed, something changed. Kylie didn't seem as present anymore. The visits grew shorter, her words more mechanical, until one night, everything began to make sense. It was late, and the hospital was silent. Kylie, sitting beside his bed, was speaking softly on the phone, her voice carrying a tone Elliot didn't recognize. No, he doesn't have a chance. The doctors said it's only a matter of time. A man's voice responded from the other end, casual and unconcerned. Does that mean we can start planning soon? Yes, Kylie replied with a nervous laugh. Soon we'll be free. The man was Jonathan, someone Kylie occasionally mentioned. Elliot knew he had been her boyfriend before they got married, but he believed the relationship was in the past. Now, Jonathan had reappeared as something far more threatening. And the fortune? Jonathan asked. As soon as the machines are turned off, it will all be mine, Kylie replied, and we can finally have the life we've always wanted. The words echoed like a death sentence for Elliot. He realized that Kylie had never loved him the way he believed. Their marriage had been nothing more than a convenience. She had used his love and trust to build a comfortable life, while keeping Jonathan as the true holder of her heart. Elliot felt the pain of betrayal morph into something different. Anger and hatred mingled with a dark determination. He would not be the victim of this cruel plan. He would not let Kylie and Jonathan succeed. He would fight with every ounce of strength he had left. Against all odds, Elliot began to show signs of recovery. A barely perceptible movement of a finger was enough to spark hope among the doctors. But it also unsettled Kylie, who started to realize her plans might not be as easy to execute as she had thought. Weeks later, Elliot spoke for the first time. His words were fragile but carried a calculated lie. I don't remember anything. Amnesia became his weapon. Kylie seemed relieved, perhaps believing the accident had erased any memory of her conversation with Jonathan. Elliot knew time was on his side. He would play the part of the fragile man she expected, but behind the facade, he was rebuilding his strength and planning every move. When he finally returned home, Kylie maintained the guise of a caring wife, but Elliot knew too much. He discreetly hired a team to investigate her and Jonathan's activities, gathering evidence of every meeting, every conversation, and every suspicious transaction. One night, as Kylie left the house ostensibly to take care of something at work, Elliot sat in the living room staring at a photo of their wedding. The man in that picture no longer existed. What remained was someone forged by betrayal, determined to expose and destroy those who had tried to condemn him to oblivion. He smiled to himself, a cold, resolute smile. They thought he was broken, but they had no idea they were about to face the man they had created through their cruelty. Elliot Parker had returned to the house he and Kylie had shared for nearly a decade, but nothing felt the same anymore. He looked at the walls adorned with photographs and memories of a marriage he now knew was a sham. The space was immaculate, with furniture chosen by Kylie more to impress visitors than for personal comfort. Every detail, once a reflection of what he thought was a home, now seemed like a monument to falsehood. Kylie played the role of the devoted wife, with a performance worthy of applause. Organized, attentive, and always smiling, she worked hard to project an image of control. On the surface, she appeared concerned about Elliot's health, always ready to meet his needs. But he knew it was all an act. Kylie was simply waiting for the right moment to finish what she had started. She was the kind of woman who charmed everyone around her effortlessly. At social events, Kylie captivated Elliot's friends and clients with her intelligence and charisma. To those observing her, she seemed perfect. But behind that enchanting smile, Elliot now saw something darker. A woman driven by ambition, capable of manipulation and deceit without hesitation to achieve her goals. Jonathan, the man Kylie described as the true love of her life, was a stark contrast to Elliot. He had a casual charm that masked his lack of substance. Jonathan had never been a man of great achievements or ambitions. He lived life indulgently, driven by the pleasures of the moment, be it parties, fleeting relationships, or grandiose plans that never materialized. When Kylie and Elliot married, Jonathan had disappeared for a while, pursuing his unstable life, but his reappearance, now as Kylie's accomplice, brought a new kind of threat to Elliot. While Kylie went to great lengths to appear the ideal wife, Jonathan was reckless, often disregarding the consequences of his actions. He cared little for discretion. He was a man who felt invincible alongside a woman willing to do anything for him. Jonathan's confidence in the success of their plans with Kylie was so blind that he couldn't imagine Elliot being more aware than he let on. Gradually, Elliot began to gather crucial information. Using the team of investigators he had hired, he uncovered details of Kylie's double life. She regularly met Jonathan at a discreet motel on the outskirts of Indianapolis, always careful to avoid being recognized by anyone who might know her or Elliot. The messages between them, filled with declarations of love and plans for the future, were the most painful proof of her betrayal. Additionally, the investigators discovered a secret bank account in Kylie's name. She had been transferring money from their joint account into this hidden fund, preparing for a life with Jonathan far from Elliot and the consequences of their actions. It was clear to Elliot that Kylie's greed knew no bounds, but there was something even more unsettling in the investigators' reports. Kylie seemed increasingly distant and impatient with Jonathan. Despite keeping their plan in motion, the frequent arguments between them indicated that their relationship was far from perfect. Kylie, always demanding, pressured Jonathan to think of quicker and more effective ways to get rid of Elliot. Jonathan, on the other hand, appeared less and less committed, as if growing tired of Kylie's intensity and the responsibilities she wanted to impose. These tensions between them were a spark of hope for Elliot. He knew Jonathan's selfishness and Kylie's controlled temperament could be turned against them at the right moment. All he needed was patience and strategy. As Elliot observed Kylie's behavior at home, he couldn't help but reflect on the past. He remembered how he had met her at a charity event for local entrepreneurs. Kylie had been radiant that night, wearing a red dress that seemed to reflect her confident personality. Elliot was instantly captivated. To him, Kylie was everything he had sought in a partner, intelligent, fun, and full of life. But there were signs he had ignored at the time. Kylie rarely spoke about her past, and when she did, it was vague and selective. Elliot now understood that she had carried with her the unfinished story with Jonathan, a love she had never let go of. Her marriage to Elliot had not been built on genuine love, but on convenience. He had the resources and stability Jonathan could never offer, and Kylie had seized the opportunity without hesitation. As Kylie and Jonathan revealed their true selves, Elliot began to rebuild the man he had been before the accident. He resumed his work gradually, claiming his memory was returning bit by bit. His loyal team had kept the company stable during his absence and now celebrated his return. Elliot found solace in the hours spent at the office, away from Kylie's manipulations, quietly planning his revenge. At the same time, he began reconnecting with people he hadn't seen in a long time. One of them was Veronica, a former college classmate who had unexpectedly reappeared in his life. Veronica was sweet, loyal, and unpretentious, the complete opposite of Kylie. She seemed genuinely happy to see Elliot recovering and took an interest in his health without ulterior motives. These conversations became a balm for Elliot, a reminder that authentic people still existed in his life. As Kylie continued to underestimate him, believing he was fully under her control, Elliot watched her every move with a quiet intensity. He knew time was on his side, and that when the moment came, he would be ready to expose the truth in a way so devastating that nothing would be left for her or Jonathan. Elliot spent hours reviewing the records and evidence the investigators had gathered. The exchanged messages, the motel meetings, the bank transfers, all formed a web of proof he would use at the perfect moment. Every detail was meticulously preserved, a powerful weapon waiting to be unleashed. Despite the cold detachment with which he analyzed the situation, there were moments of introspection. Elliot couldn't help but feel the pain of knowing the love he had so generously offered had been spurned and manipulated. But that pain also fueled him. He knew he couldn't undo the past, but he had control over how he would shape the future. As the tension within the house grew, Elliot continued playing the role of the vulnerable man. Kylie pressed on with her plans, Jonathan remained oblivious to the risks he faced, and Elliot observed in silence, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Elliot knew that time was both his greatest ally and his greatest challenge. He needed to act before Kylie and Jonathan decided to take more drastic measures, but he also had to ensure that every step of his revenge was executed with precision. His strategy was to slowly construct a scenario in which Kylie and Jonathan would fall into their own trap, all while reclaiming full control of his life. At home, Kylie was beginning to show signs of impatience. Despite her efforts to maintain the facade of a loving wife, Elliot noticed the small cracks. She would glance at him with barely concealed irritation when she thought he wasn't paying attention. Her late-night outings became more frequent, always justified with increasingly flimsy excuses. "Work has been so demanding lately," she would say, smiling as though expecting Elliot to accept her words without question. Elliot, for his part, pretended to believe her. He knew that confronting her now would be pointless and would only put her on high alert. Instead, he used those opportunities to deepen his investigation. The evidence continued to pile up. The messages exchanged between Kylie and Jonathan revealed that the pair was beginning to lose patience. Jonathan, in particular, seemed increasingly frustrated by the delays in executing their plan. "How much longer are we going to wait?" he wrote. "I can't stand living in the shadows anymore." Kylie tried to reassure him, but her own anxiety was evident in her replies. "It's almost ready. We just need to be careful, trust me." These small signs of tension between them were exactly what Elliot needed. He began to subtly feed Kylie's paranoia, planting doubts without her realizing it. One day, while she was at work, he rearranged some documents in the home office, including papers related to the secret bank account she had opened. When Kylie returned, she noticed something was out of place, but Elliot feigned ignorance. "I must have moved them by accident," he said, with a confused expression that reinforced his supposed amnesia. Kylie smiled, but Elliot noticed the glint of worry in her eyes. From that day on, she became more cautious, but also more anxious. Every small interaction between them became a chess match, with Elliot calmly moving his pieces while Kylie and Jonathan started making impulsive decisions. One evening, Kylie returned from one of her work meetings later than usual. Elliot waited for her in the living room, the television playing some random program. He watched as she left her shoes by the door, her movements tense, her eyes avoiding his. "Tough day at work?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. "Yes, it was. Exhausting," she replied, quickly changing the subject. "And you? How did you feel today?" Elliot smiled, forcing a tone of vulnerability. "I think I'm getting better. Maybe soon I'll even be able to go for a walk on my own." The statement was deliberate. He knew Kylie wanted the opposite, for him to remain dependent and vulnerable. By showing signs of progress, Elliot was planting more seeds of uncertainty. Meanwhile, Jonathan began acting recklessly. During one of their meetings at the motel, he tried to convince Kylie to speed up the process. suggesting she pressure the doctors to reassess Elliot's condition. Kylie hesitated, saying that such a move could raise suspicions. "If he keeps improving, our plan will fall apart," Jonathan insisted. "You need to do something soon." "What if he already suspects something?" Kylie countered, her voice filled with tension. "How could he? He doesn't even remember who he is." Jonathan's words only fueled Kylie's doubts. She began observing Elliot more closely, trying to detect any signs that he might be recovering more than just his physical memory. Elliot noticed this and used it to his advantage, alternating between moments of apparent confusion and subtle yet evident progress. The tension reached a peak during a dinner with old friends of the couple. Kylie suggested the gathering, perhaps to project a sense of normalcy in her life. Elliot, though reluctant, agreed. During the dinner, he played the role of a man still recovering from trauma, but with a touch of subtle malice. As Kylie talked with the friends about Elliot's recovery, he interrupted with a comment that made her blood run cold. "Sometimes I have strange dreams. It's like I hear voices. A woman speaking in my room." Kylie's expression was one of pure shock, but she quickly forced a smile. "That's normal, darling. The brain is just trying to process memories." Elliot nodded, but noticed her discomfort. Jonathan also went silent for several days after the dinner, something the investigators noted as unusual. It was clear Kylie had discussed the situation with him. Elliot's next move was the riskiest yet. He anonymously sent a copy of the messages between Kylie and Jonathan to her phone. The text contained only one line. "Do you really think he doesn't know?" When Kylie saw the message, her face went pale. Elliot, observing from a distance, pretended to be engrossed in a book. Kylie retreated to the bedroom, where she spent nearly an hour on the phone with Jonathan discussing what to do. "Someone's trying to blackmail us," she said, her voice trembling. "That's impossible. No one knows. What if it's him? What if Elliot is pretending?" Jonathan's response was cold. "You're being paranoid. He doesn't know anything. But if he does, it just means we need to act faster." Kylie didn't reply immediately, but Elliot knew her mind was spinning. Jonathan, as always, was focused on the most convenient solution, ignoring the long-term consequences. By the end of that week, Kylie did something Elliot hadn't expected. She scheduled a meeting with a lawyer, supposedly to adjust the inheritance and asset division documents. This meant she was preparing to act, regardless of the risks. Elliot saw this as the signal that it was time to advance to the next phase of his plan. As Kylie and Jonathan moved with haste and carelessness, Elliot remained calm, adjusting every detail to ensure the final blow would be devastating. The anger that had once consumed him was now replaced by a cold, methodical focus. He knew he was close to bringing down the house of cards Kylie and Jonathan had built. What they didn't realize was that, in their attempt to destroy Elliot, they had only given him a reason to become more dangerous than they could ever imagine. As Elliot advanced his plan for revenge, the dynamics between the secondary characters in his life grew increasingly significant. He didn't just focus on Kylie and Jonathan, but also on how the pieces around him could be leveraged to create the necessary impact at the decisive moment. A key figure in this scenario was Veronica, the former college friend with whom Elliot had reconnected. Now a successful therapist, Veronica initially re-entered Elliot's life to offer emotional support. She'd heard about his accident through mutual friends, and despite years of distance felt compelled to reach out. Her arrival seemed casual at first, but quickly became essential to Elliot's emotional balance. With her warm personality and genuine empathy, Veronica brought something Elliot hadn't realized he needed, a renewed perspective on what true love could be. He had no intention of pursuing a relationship while his life was in turmoil, but her presence planted a seed of hope. Veronica, for her part, wasn't aware of Kylie's betrayal, but found her behavior suspicious during a few visits. "Your wife seems reserved," Veronica remarked cautiously one day, as they sipped coffee in a park. "She has her priorities," Elliot replied with a smile that masked the storm within. Veronica respected Elliot's boundaries, but her intuition told her something was amiss. Elliot, aware of this, began to trust her more than anyone else. Meanwhile, Kylie and Jonathan's relationship continued to unravel. Jonathan, who never had the patience for the games of manipulation Kylie was forced to play, began to distance himself. Though he still desired Elliot's fortune, the emotional and logistical strain of the plan weighed on him. "This has gone too far," Jonathan said during a meeting at the motel. "You promised this would be quick." "And you think I'm enjoying this?" Kylie snapped, exasperated. "This is all for us, Jonathan. Why are you being so ungrateful? Maybe because I'm tired of waiting while you parade around as the perfect wife." This conversation was recorded by the investigators Elliot had hired, capturing the growing discord between the two. The once passionate relationship between Jonathan and Kylie had become poisoned with tension and recrimination. Elliot knew he could exploit this fragility to hasten their downfall. Another element Elliot began to leverage was his own company staff. He had always valued their loyalty, and many of them had viewed Kylie with suspicion since the beginning of the marriage. Among the closest was Charles, his longtime assistant, who had stood by Elliot during his recovery. Charles had a unique ability to notice details others missed. "I've been observing Kylie lately," Charles mentioned during a private meeting with Elliot. "Something seems off." "What exactly?" Elliot asked carefully. "I'm not sure, but she seems distracted. Nervous even." Elliot knew Kylie's distraction was a reflection of her growing paranoia. She was starting to feel that something was slipping out of her control, and Charles had picked up on it. Elliot began assigning small tasks to Charles, using him as an extension of his own eyes and ears within the company, ensuring every piece of information was analyzed and archived for his moment of triumph. Meanwhile, Kylie, preoccupied with hiding her relationship with Jonathan, began to neglect other aspects of her life. One such oversight proved crucial. She forgot to check the mail regularly. Elliot intercepted a bank statement revealing more transfers from their joint account to Kylie's secret account. This was exactly what he needed to confront her when the time was right. The situation also had an indirect impact on the couple's social life. Close friends began commenting on Kylie's frequent absences and her apparent detachment at social events. While Elliot continued playing the role of the devoted husband, the whispers grew. "Is everything okay between the two of you?" an old friend asked during a party at another couple's home. "We're going through a tough time, but that's normal in any marriage," Elliot replied with a forced smile. The response was enough to quell curiosity, but the rumors continued to spread. Elliot knew that at the right moment, social judgment would be one of his most devastating weapons against Kylie. Another significant development was Elliot's emotional connection with Veronica's daughter, an 8-year-old girl named Lucy. Veronica was a single mother, and Lucy quickly grew fond of Elliot. The three began spending more time together, and Lucy's vibrant energy brought an unexpected lightness to Elliot's life. One afternoon at the park, as they watched Lucy play, Veronica remarked, "You've changed a lot since we started meeting. You seem lighter. Maybe it's because you reminded me that there's still goodness in the world." Veronica smiled, touched by Elliot's sincerity, unaware of the weight behind his words. To Elliot, she represented a new chance at happiness, something he thought impossible while trapped in the emotional hell caused by Kylie. Kylie, however, began noticing Elliot's connection with Veronica, though she couldn't be sure how deep it went. Despite her affair with Jonathan, Kylie's selfishness wouldn't let her accept the idea of losing control over Elliot. "Who's this woman you've been seeing?" she asked one evening, trying to sound casual. "An old friend. She's been helping me cope with everything. I hope you know what you're doing." Elliot didn't respond, simply watching Kylie leave the room with poorly concealed irritation. Her insecurity was a clear sign that his plan was working. As the subplots unfolded, Elliot began to see how the cracks in Kylie and Jonathan's relationship, the support from Veronica, and the growing distrust surrounding Kylie were aligning perfectly. He was crafting a stage where, at the right moment, every character would play their part in exposing the truth beyond dispute. Kylie and Jonathan were moving like puppets in a game they thought they controlled, but Elliot held the strings. He knew patience was his greatest ally, and that soon the tension he had created would become unbearable for them both. The turning point came unexpectedly and explosively, just as Elliot had planned. While Kylie and Jonathan were preoccupied with their dysfunctional relationship and attempts to hasten their plan, Elliot masterfully manipulated events, setting the stage for an inevitable confrontation. That morning, the house was eerily quiet. Kylie had left early, claiming a work meeting, but Elliot knew she was meeting Jonathan. He seized the opportunity to activate the next phase of his revenge. With the help of Charles, his assistant, Elliot had prepared a presentation that would clearly and mercilessly unveil all the evidence of Kylie's betrayal. The occasion? An anniversary party he decided to host. The idea of celebrating their marriage seemed absurd, but Elliot knew Kylie wouldn't decline. For her, maintaining appearances was essential. He spent weeks orchestrating the event, inviting friends, family, and colleagues. Everything was arranged to look like a genuine celebration, but Elliot knew it would be anything but. When Kylie arrived home that evening, she found Elliot sitting in the living room, reviewing a guest list. "What's this?" she asked cautiously. "I've decided we need to celebrate our anniversary," he replied, not looking up from the list. "I think everyone will enjoy seeing that we're stronger than ever." Kylie hesitated but nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course, darling. It's a great idea." In the days leading up to the party, Elliot watched Kylie closely. She seemed nervous, as if sensing something was off, but unable to pinpoint what. Jonathan, meanwhile, grew increasingly impatient, urging her to find a way to accelerate their plan. On the morning of the party, Elliot reviewed the final details with Charles. The presentation was ready, the guests confirmed, and the investigative team assured him that Kylie and Jonathan were being closely monitored in case they attempted anything unexpected. Everything was set for the moment Elliot would pull the rug out from under them. That evening, the house filled with guests. Kylie greeted friends with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, while Elliot observed from a distance, maintaining the guise of a man still recovering. He knew the night would be long, but the climax was near. At one point, Elliot stepped onto the improvised stage he had set up in the living room. With Charles's assistance, he rose from his wheelchair, drawing gasps of surprise and applause from the crowd. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice steady. "This party is a celebration of love, loyalty, and trust, the pillars of any strong relationship." He paused, looking directly at Kylie, who froze in the middle of the crowd. However, sometimes those pillars are tested, and in some cases, they are completely destroyed. Murmurs began to ripple through the guests as a screen descended behind Elliot. He held a remote in his hand and pressed a button. The lights dimmed, and the screen began to display images and videos no one there expected to see. The messages exchanged between Kylie and Jonathan, the recordings of their conversations, the bank transfer records, all were presented meticulously and chronologically. Each piece of evidence landed like a devastating blow against Kylie, who stood paralyzed in shock. The guests, stunned, looked between Kylie and Elliot, trying to make sense of what they were witnessing. Kylie tried to speak, but no words came out. Jonathan, who was also present, took a step back, attempting to blend into the crowd. "For those who still have doubts," Elliot continued coldly, "these are the truths of what was happening while I was fighting for my life." He turned to Kylie, staring directly at her. "You betrayed me. You stole from me. And you planned to take my life to claim my money." The silence that followed was absolute. Elliot then turned to the guests. "Now everyone knows the truth." Kylie finally found her voice, but her words were desperate and incoherent. "Elliot, I can explain. It's not what it looks like." Jonathan attempted to slip out the back door, but he was intercepted by one of the security guards Elliot had hired. He was forced back into the room where all eyes turned to him. "And you," Elliot said, pointing at Jonathan. "You're not just her accomplice. You're a parasite who thrives on the destruction you cause in others' lives." Jonathan opened his mouth to respond, but quickly realized there was no escape. What followed was the complete public ruin of Kylie and Jonathan. Elliot ensured that the night was documented with videos and photographs, knowing the events would spread quickly through Indianapolis society. He had orchestrated everything to leave no room for doubt or excuses, but the most shocking moment of the night was yet to come. As the crowd began to disperse, Kylie tried to confront Elliot, pleading for a chance to explain. "Please, Elliot, can we talk? I was confused. Jonathan manipulated me." Elliot looked at her with disdain. "Confused? Were you confused when you transferred our money into a secret account? When you planned to disconnect my life support? No, Kylie. You knew exactly what you were doing." He stepped closer, his voice calm yet cutting. "You destroyed everything we had, and now you'll live with the consequences." Jonathan, who had remained silent for most of the confrontation, finally spoke up. "Kylie, this isn't going to work. I can't do this." Kylie turned to him, incredulous. "What do you mean?" "I'm not dealing with this. You're on your own." And with those words, Jonathan walked out of the house, leaving Kylie alone amidst the wreckage of her life. Elliot delivered his final statement. "You chose your path, Kylie. I hope it was worth it." She collapsed to the floor, sobbing as Elliot walked away, feeling the tension that had gripped him for so long finally begin to dissipate. The turning point was complete. Kylie and Jonathan had been publicly destroyed, and Elliot was ready to rebuild his life, free from the shadows of his past. The days following the party were like a whirlwind, not just for Kylie, but for all of Indianapolis society. The scandal spread rapidly. Videos of Elliot's presentation circulated on social media, accompanied by merciless commentary and judgment. Kylie and Jonathan's betrayal became the hottest topic in every social circle, while Elliot was exalted as the betrayed man who had the courage to expose the truth. Kylie faced an isolation she had never imagined possible. Friends, colleagues, and even family stopped taking her calls. Shame kept her trapped at home, haunted by the memories of what she had lost. The luxurious life she once cherished was now in jeopardy. Jonathan disappeared entirely after the party. Elliot's investigators tracked him to a neighboring town, living in a cheap motel with no interest in contacting Kylie. He had not only severed emotional ties, but also refused to take any responsibility for the situation. Elliot, on the other hand, remained publicly silent after the revelation. To the world, he appeared as a man simply trying to move forward after a devastating betrayal. But behind closed doors, he continued working to ensure that Kylie and Jonathan faced every possible consequence. The division of assets was inevitable, as Elliot had foreseen. Despite the irrefutable evidence of Kylie's betrayal, Indiana law ensured that she still had rights to a significant portion of Elliot's fortune. The final settlement was a sum that seemed exorbitant to most, but to Elliot it was a small price to pay to rid himself of her once and for all. He knew the money would eventually be squandered, leaving Kylie with nothing but regret. Kylie tried to maintain a dignified appearance as she left the house that had once symbolized her social ascent, but her eyes betrayed the truth. She was shattered. Her reputation was in ruins, and the money she received felt like an empty prize compared to what she had lost. Meanwhile, Elliot focused on rebuilding his life. The company, which he had kept stable throughout the ordeal, now became his primary refuge. He regained full control of operations, surprising even his closest colleagues with his renewed determination. Charles, who had witnessed the chaos of the past months up close, remarked during a quiet moment, "I never imagined you'd come back so strong after all this." Elliot smiled, but didn't reply. He knew he wasn't the same man who had entered that marriage. The pain of betrayal had transformed him irreversibly, but he chose to use that transformation as a catalyst to become stronger. At the same time, his relationship with Veronica continued to develop naturally and sincerely. She knew about Kylie's betrayal, but never pressured Elliot to share more than he was ready to. Her patience and kindness created a safe space where Elliot could gradually open himself to the possibility of love again. Veronica played a crucial role in helping Elliot find a new purpose. "You've always had so much energy for building things," she said one day, as they walked through the park with Lucy. "Maybe it's time to use that for something beyond work." Her words resonated with Elliot. He began engaging in philanthropic projects, using his fortune to support social causes in Indianapolis. The work not only helped rebuild his public image, but also offered a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. For Kylie, however, the consequences were just beginning. The fortune she received quickly dwindled. Without the skills or experience to sustain her lifestyle, she relied entirely on the money to maintain her comfort. But her financial recklessness soon caught up with her. Extravagant parties, trips, and purchases reduced her bank account to a fraction of what it had been. Then came the final blow, a diagnosis of advanced stage cancer. Kylie, who had always been obsessed with control and appearance, was confronted with a reality no amount of money could change. Jonathan, whom she believed to be her soulmate, refused to help her. "I can't deal with this," he said coldly over the phone. "This isn't what I signed up for." Jonathan's rejection was the final nail in Kylie's coffin. Alone and without resources, she decided to turn to Elliot, the only person she believed might help her. When Kylie appeared at the door of Elliot's new home, she was a shadow of the woman he once knew. Her once vibrant face was pale, marked by illness and the weight of regret. Elliot opened the door but showed no surprise at seeing her. "Elliot," she began weakly, "I need help." For a moment he stood in silence, assessing the figure before him. He felt a twinge of compassion, but it was distant, diluted by everything she had done. "You've come to the wrong place, Kylie." His words were harsh but necessary. Elliot knew that helping her would mean reopening a door he had worked so hard to close. Kylie tried to appeal to his humanity. "I know I made mistakes, but I have no one else. Jonathan abandoned me, and I'm dying." Elliot sighed, feeling the weight of the moment. He knew that regardless of his actions, Kylie's fate was already sealed. "All I can offer you are words of comfort, Kylie. Beyond that, I have nothing for you." He closed the door, leaving Kylie outside. That was the last time he saw her. Days later, Elliot received news that she had passed away alone in a small apartment. While Kylie's death brought a definitive end to the story, Elliot knew there were no true winners in this ordeal. What remained now was a new beginning. Alongside Veronica and Lucy, Elliot found a new way of living, one that valued honesty, true love, and the peace he had lost for so many years. The consequences for each character were clear. Kylie reaped the fruits of her choices. Jonathan faded into obscurity, unable to maintain any meaningful relationships, and Elliot, though marked by the scars of betrayal, emerged stronger and wiser. At last, he was free. Elliot Parker had weathered the storm of betrayal and revenge, but he knew the next challenge would be even greater: rebuilding himself. While exposing Kylie and Jonathan brought an immediate sense of justice, the void left after closing that chapter of his life was inescapable. To move forward, Elliot would need more than vengeance. He would need to find a new purpose and learn to live fully again. In the months that followed, Elliot immersed himself in his philanthropic projects, seeking to give his fortune a deeper meaning. He founded a non-profit organization dedicated to helping accident victims and individuals facing physical and emotional disabilities like those he had endured after his crash. The initiative was warmly received by the Indianapolis community, and Elliot felt he was giving something positive back to the world, drawing on his personal experiences for motivation. Veronica became a cornerstone of this process. Though careful to respect Elliot's space, her steady presence and emotional support helped soften the more difficult moments. Veronica often encouraged him to step out of his comfort zone and explore new ways of living. "You've spent so much time fighting to survive that you've forgotten how to truly live," she said one day as they walked through the park with Lucy. Elliot reflected on her words and began to embrace the idea of enjoying life's small pleasures. He resumed regular walks, at first with difficulty, but gradually with renewed strength. Slowly, he allowed himself to indulge in activities that once seemed trivial: watching a movie, cooking a simple dinner, or spending hours talking with Veronica. Lucy, with her youthful energy and curiosity, became an unexpected source of joy. Elliot found himself captivated by the stories she invented and enjoyed helping her with school projects. Though he wasn't a father, the connection he formed with Lucy made him wonder what it might be like to have a family again, this time one built on genuine love and trust. The healing process, however, wasn't without its challenges. Despite his progress, Elliot still carried the emotional scars of betrayal. Occasionally he would revisit the evidence he had gathered against Kylie and Jonathan, not to relive the pain, but to remind himself of how far he had come. He didn't want to forget the lessons from that experience. People aren't always what they seem, but genuine kindness and loyalty also exist. One evening, as he and Veronica shared a quiet dinner at his home, she broached a subject Elliot had been avoiding. "Have you ever thought about therapy?" Elliot looked at her, surprised but not offended. "I don't know, I think I've been handling it well on my own." "I know you have, but handling it alone doesn't mean you couldn't use some help. Sometimes talking to someone outside of it all can bring a new perspective." He considered her words and a few weeks later decided to give it a try. Therapy was a revealing process for Elliot. As he shared his experiences with a professional, he began to understand how Kylie's betrayal had eroded his self-confidence and altered his perception of relationships. Most importantly, he realized that revenge, while satisfying in the moment, wasn't enough to fill the void left by the betrayal. Over time, Elliot began to let go. He stopped revisiting the evidence against Kylie and Jonathan, choosing instead to focus on the future. He accepted that while he couldn't erase the past, he could learn from it and use it to grow into a better person. Veronica and Lucy remained a constant presence in his life, but Elliot was careful to let his relationship with Veronica progress naturally. He wanted to ensure he was truly ready before taking any serious steps. A significant milestone came when Elliot decided to visit Kylie's grave. He had never felt obligated to go, but one spring morning, something compelled him. He walked through the cemetery with a calm demeanor, finding the simple site where she had been buried. Standing before the headstone, Elliot felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and compassion. He spoke softly, not expecting anyone to hear, but feeling the need to say something. "You made choices that destroyed what we had. I'll never fully understand why, but I hope you found peace. I'm choosing to move on." As he left the cemetery, Elliot felt a weight lift. It wasn't forgiveness he offered, but an acknowledgement that the past was beyond his control. In time, his relationship with Veronica deepened into something more profound. Elliot realized she was everything he had ever hoped for in a partner: loyal, honest, and someone who shared his vision for life. When they finally confessed their love for each other, it was a moment of quiet joy, absent of grand gestures, but full of certainty that they were building something real. 2 years later, Elliot and Veronica married in a small but meaningful ceremony. Lucy served as the flower girl, and Charles, his loyal assistant, stood as his best man. As Elliot walked beside Veronica, he knew he was beginning a new journey, one defined not by secrets and manipulation, but by love and honesty. Elliot Parker's life wasn't perfect, but it was authentic. He had learned that overcoming a deep trauma wasn't about erasing the past, but about building something new on its ruins. The man who emerged from this process was stronger, wiser, and finally happy. Though Elliot Parker had begun rebuilding his life, he knew one final step was necessary to truly close the dark chapter that Kylie and Jonathan had written in his story. To move forward without any lingering shadows, he needed to ensure that Jonathan, the last remnant of that betrayal, was fully exposed and defeated. The opportunity arose unexpectedly when Charles, now elevated to a position of even greater trust in Elliot's company, shared an interesting piece of information during a casual meeting. "Elliot, did you know that Jonathan is back in Indianapolis?" Charles asked, carefully watching his boss's reaction. Elliot looked up from the report he was reviewing, surprised by the revelation. "I had no idea. What's he doing here?" "It seems he's trying to make a comeback. He's started a small consulting firm, but I've already heard rumors of some questionable practices." Elliot felt the familiar tension that came with hearing Jonathan's name, but instead of anger, he experienced a calculated calm. Jonathan was in a vulnerable position, and Elliot recognized this as his chance to bring closure to the story once and for all. Over the following days, Elliot began gathering information about Jonathan's activities. The newly launched consulting firm was little more than a front for financial scams. Jonathan offered advice to local business owners, promising quick and lucrative returns. Many fell for the scheme, investing large sums of money that soon vanished without explanation. With the help of his network and Charles's support, Elliot obtained documents linking Jonathan directly to the fraud. Armed with this evidence, Elliot decided it was time to act. But he wanted Jonathan's exposure to be as public as Kylie's had been. Elliot organized a charity event in Indianapolis, framing it as an opportunity to bring together local business leaders to discuss impactful social initiatives. Jonathan, ever drawn to opportunities to impress and attract new clients, couldn't resist the invitation. Veronica, now closer to Elliot than ever, noticed something different about him that week. "You seem restless. Is everything okay?" she asked as they reviewed the guest list for the event. Elliot hesitated before responding, knowing she deserved the truth. "Jonathan will be there." Veronica was silent for a moment, processing the information. "What do you plan to do?" "Show the truth. He's exploited people, manipulated them, and destroyed lives. It's time for him to face the consequences." Though worried, Veronica nodded. She trusted Elliot's meticulous nature, but feared this might reopen wounds he was trying to heal. The night of the event. The venue was filled with entrepreneurs, politicians, and prominent community members. Elliot, ever charismatic, embraced his role as host with ease, greeting guests and moving through the crowd confidently. Jonathan arrived late, clearly trying to avoid drawing attention, but Elliot spotted him immediately. Jonathan looked worn down, a shadow of the arrogant man Elliot once knew, yet he still attempted to project an air of success, chatting animatedly with small groups and handing out business cards. The event began with speeches highlighting the achievements of Elliot's non-profit organization. When it was Elliot's turn to speak, he took the stage with his usual poise, but the tone of his address shifted unexpectedly. "Tonight we're here to celebrate transparency and integrity," he began, locking eyes with Jonathan in the crowd. "As we all know, integrity is the foundation of any meaningful relationship, whether personal or professional." Jonathan frowned, sensing the shift in direction. Elliot continued, "However, there are those who choose a different path, exploiting the trust of others for personal gain." At that moment, the lights dimmed, and a video began to play on a large screen behind Elliot. It revealed Jonathan's connections to financial scams, including testimony from victims who had lost everything to his false promises. The room fell into stunned silence, punctuated only by murmurs of shock and indignation. Jonathan attempted to slip out quietly, but security guards hired by Elliot blocked the exits. "Tonight, we're here to restore the truth and protect our community from individuals like him," Elliot concluded, his gaze fixed on Jonathan. The murmurs turned into open confrontation as guests voiced their outrage. Jonathan, cornered and humiliated, tried to deny the accusations, but the evidence was irrefutable. The police, already alerted to Jonathan's illegal activities, were present at the event. They arrested him on the spot as cameras captured the moment, flashes documenting his handcuffed exit amidst the disdainful stares of the crowd. Veronica, who had watched from afar, approached Elliot as the event began to wind down. "It's done then?" Elliot sighed, feeling the weight of the moment. "It is." Though Jonathan's exposure was a necessary conclusion, Elliot realized that his true victory wasn't in the downfall of the man who betrayed him, but in the strength he had found to move forward. That night marked the definitive end of a chapter that had cast a long shadow over his life. Moving forward. As they left the event and drove home, Veronica reached over and took Elliot's hand. "I think now you can finally leave it all behind." For the first time in years, Elliot felt she was right. He had faced his past, confronted his demons, and emerged with a renewed sense of purpose. The final piece of his journey to healing was complete. The climax of Elliot Parker's journey began the morning after the charity event. Though he had finally exposed Jonathan and closed a significant chapter of his past, he woke with an unexpected heaviness. It wasn't regret. It was the emotional exhaustion of carrying the weight of vengeance for so long, and now facing the challenge of confronting what was left of himself. As he sipped coffee in the kitchen with Veronica, the quiet of the moment was interrupted by a notification on his phone. Charles, ever diligent, had sent a brief but significant message. "Jonathan wants to talk to you. He asked for this before being taken into custody." Elliot stared at the message, silent for a moment. Veronica noticed the tension and leaned forward in her chair, waiting for an explanation. "He wants to see me," Elliot finally said. "Do you think you should go?" Elliot didn't respond immediately. Part of him felt there was nothing more to say or hear, but another part knew this meeting might be the final closure he needed to move on. "I need to hear what he has to say," he concluded. Veronica didn't try to dissuade him. "Just promise me you won't let this drag you back into the past." Elliot nodded, grateful for her support despite her obvious concerns. The meeting. At the detention center where Jonathan was being held, Elliot was led into a stark room with white walls and a metal table at its center. Jonathan was already there, handcuffed but still carrying the defiant air that seemed intrinsic to him. "So you came," Jonathan said with a cynical smile. "I've got 15 minutes. Make it worth my time," Elliot replied, his tone flat. Jonathan leaned forward, his eyes studying the man across from him. "You know, I always admired you, not for what you had, but for how easy you made it all look." Elliot stayed silent, letting Jonathan speak. "Kylie, she never loved you, you know? She tried, but what we had was different. It was real passion." Elliot narrowed his eyes but didn't react. He knew Jonathan was trying to provoke him and refused to give him the satisfaction. "If it was so real," Elliot said coldly, "why did you abandon her when she needed you the most?" Jonathan glanced away momentarily, but quickly returned his gaze to Elliot. "Because I'm not the hero of this story, and honestly, neither are you." Elliot leaned in slightly. "Did you ask me here to say something meaningful, or just to spew the same tired excuses?" Jonathan smirked, but it was empty. "You won, Elliot. There's nothing left for me to hide. I just wanted you to know that deep down you were never the target. Kylie was. She always knew how to use people to get what she wanted, and you, with all your money and power, were the perfect prize." Jonathan's words, though harsh, weren't new to Elliot. He had already reached those conclusions on his own. What he realized, however, was that Jonathan wasn't seeking redemption or forgiveness. He was merely trying to maintain a shred of control, even in defeat. "Maybe you're right," Elliot replied calmly. "Maybe neither of us is the hero. But the difference between us is that I've learned from all of this, and you'll keep hiding behind excuses until the very end." Jonathan chuckled darkly. "You think this is over? Even with Kylie dead and me in here? Things like this don't disappear so easily." Elliot stood, signaling that the conversation was over. "You're right, Jonathan. Some things never disappear, but that doesn't mean I can't move on." Without another glance, Elliot left the room, feeling a mix of relief and resignation. Jonathan represented the most toxic parts of his past, and finally, Elliot could leave him where he belonged, in the past. When Elliot returned home, Veronica was waiting for him. "How did it go?" she asked, her concern evident. Elliot sighed as he sat beside her on the sofa. "It's over." Veronica took his hand, and for a moment, they sat in silence. Elliot knew she understood the weight of those words. That night, as he gazed out the window of his bedroom, Elliot reflected on everything that had happened. He no longer saw himself as the victim of betrayal, nor as the man consumed by revenge. Above all, he was someone who had survived. For the first time in years, Elliot felt truly free. The months following Jonathan's public exposure marked a true transition for Elliot Parker. While he had closed the darkest chapter of his life, he knew the process of healing was ongoing. The newfound sense of freedom was refreshing but also challenging. Now he faced the responsibility of not just rebuilding his life, but redefining the person he wanted to become. Indianapolis, with its familiar streets and recognizable faces, felt like a different place to Elliot. The city that had once seemed filled with ghosts now became a space for fresh beginnings. The scandal surrounding Kylie and Jonathan, which had once defined him in the eyes of others, began to fade. People stopped asking about the drama and instead admired his resilience and the work he was doing with his foundation. Veronica played a vital role during this time. Not only did she offer emotional support, but she also helped Elliot find balance between work and personal life. Together, they created a routine filled with leisure, philanthropic projects, and most importantly, time for themselves. Lucy, Veronica's daughter, became a constant presence in Elliot's life. He began to see her as part of his new family. Her boundless energy brought lightness to Elliot's days, something he hadn't experienced in years. One afternoon, while walking in the park, Lucy held Elliot's hand and said something that moved him deeply. "Did you know you're like a superhero to me?" Elliot smiled, surprised. "A superhero? Why's that?" "Because you're strong and do good things for people." The simplicity of Lucy's words brought tears to Elliot's eyes. He knew he still had much to learn and overcome, but her words reaffirmed that he was on the right path. As his relationship with Veronica blossomed, Elliot decided to sell the house he had once shared with Kylie. The property, which had symbolized stability and success, now felt like a repository of memories he was ready to leave behind. He quickly found a buyer and used part of the proceeds to invest further in his foundation. Elliot's new home was smaller but far more welcoming. Located in a quiet neighborhood of Indianapolis, it was the perfect place for him and Veronica to start building a life together. One evening, as they dined on the softly lit veranda, Veronica looked at Elliot with a smile he recognized as the prelude to something important. "I've been thinking," she said, hesitant but excited. "About what?" "About us. About how we're building something beautiful together." Elliot reached for her hand. "I agree, and I want it to keep growing." Veronica laughed softly. "So what do you think about making it official?" Elliot was surprised, but not unpleasantly so. He had already considered proposing to Veronica, but the fact that she brought it up first reassured him that they were perfectly in sync. "I think it's the best idea I've ever heard." A few months later, Elliot and Veronica were married in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by close friends and family. Lucy served as the flower girl, beaming with joy as she walked down the aisle alongside her mother. The wedding was a milestone in Elliot's journey. He realized that, although he could never erase what had happened, he had the power to build something new, with honesty and genuine love as its foundation. At the same time, Elliot's foundation grew significantly. He began partnering with local hospitals to provide emotional and financial support to patients and their families. This work not only benefited the community, but also kept Elliot grounded, reminding him of the lessons he had learned through his own struggles. Jonathan, meanwhile, faced the full legal consequences of his actions. He was convicted of financial fraud and sentenced to several years in prison. During the trial, he tried to defend himself, claiming he never intended to harm anyone, but the evidence Elliot had presented was irrefutable. For Elliot, Jonathan's fate was just another necessary step in closing the cycle. As time passed, Elliot found himself thinking less and less about Kylie. Her memory became a distant reminder of what he needed to avoid in the future. He no longer felt anger or sadness, only a quiet acceptance that some people come into our lives to teach us lessons, no matter how painful. This new phase of Elliot's life brought not only happiness, but also a profound sense of fulfillment. He had rebuilt his life from the wreckage and, in the process, discovered a strength that had always been within him. On a tranquil evening, as he watched Lucy playing in the backyard with Veronica, Elliot felt a peace he hadn't known in years. He understood that while the past was an inescapable part of his story, the future was something he could shape with his own hands. In the end, Elliot Parker found not just justice, but redemption. He transformed pain into strength, betrayal into wisdom, and loss into love. His journey had been long and arduous, but the final destination made every step worthwhile. He had won, not against Kylie or Jonathan, but against the man he had almost lost along the way. Hey there, what would you do if you were in Elliot's shoes? Let me know in the comments below, and if you missed our previous story, check out what happened. Imagine the double betrayal, the husband who vowed fidelity and the adopted niece she raised as her own daughter. When the truth was revealed through a hidden camera, the betrayed wife felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. But she didn't succumb to despair. Instead, she chose to take control, turning her pain into an unforgettable act of revenge. What did she do? Something that not only shattered his trust, but also his masculinity, literally. This is a story you can't miss. So click on the video appearing on your screen now and uncover the full unfolding of this unforgettable tale. See you there.